Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am Kelley Kitley, and I am here with our wonderful author, Erica Hornthal of Body Aware. First-time author, so excited to be here and talk about your book tonight. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself? So
Sure.
Anybody who's on here and joining us tonight can get to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you everybody who's here. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask as we go along. But my name is Erica Hornthal, and in addition to writing the book Body Aware, I am a dance movement therapist. I practice in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and just really, really passionate about helping people understand how movement in general can help aid and support in their own mental health.
Love it.
Yeah. So tell us more about
Yeah,
you.
sure. I'm Kelley Kitley, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and practice throughout the Chicagoland area. I'm also an author of an autobiography of survival called Myself, and a media expert, and a mom and wife. And so I guess, before we get started with questions that I have for you about the book, I just wanted to tell everybody who's here, I met Erica about 5 years ago. She was hosting a movement seminar or class on a Sunday morning at Athleta. And I brought my daughters, and we had connected over social media, and I was just so excited to learn more about movement and therapy, and it was just so wonderful. And my daughters were really little at the time.
I know, they're like huge now.
They are old.
No, I didn't say old.
They're huge.
You haven't aged at all.
Yes.
So.
Oh, right. But it was my first experience in a group and being able to move around the room and feel things and listen to music and take up space. And
I think it was very different for anything that Athleta had done before because it wasn't exercise.
Right.
It was mindful movement. So it was so lovely. I'm really glad that we connected there.
And now you have this amazing book that I had the pleasure of reading and really educating not only people in our profession who don't know about the mind-body-spirit connection, but also anybody who's interested and wants to try it out. And what I love about the book is you give such tangible tools and vignettes of experiences, clients that you've had, that you've worked with, and the transformation that's happened. And so I'm really looking forward to doing some things towards the end of our conversation for people to try here and at home.
Sure,
okay.
That sounds good, yeah.
So I want to start by saying, how do you move today?
Right. Okay, well, let me just think about this moment, right? Like I'm feeling, I'm just noticing my body, right? Like kind of a little closed in. But I always feel that way when I'm on a screen, or trying to use a screen. So it's actually, you're allowing me to feel a little bit more open. So thank you. But I notice, anytime I'm going virtual, like this tendency to lean in and, can everybody see me? Can you hear me? But I think at this point I'm aware of it enough that it doesn't influence or fully hijack my feelings. And then asking myself, like you did, like how am I moving in this moment? And then, kind of reclaiming the space that I need. But overall, it was a good day. It was pretty light, especially client-wise. So, yeah. How about you? How are you noticing that you're moving today?
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Since I have read your book about 2 weeks ago.
Hypervigilant.
Oh my goodness. So Erica sent me this book, and I was so excited because it came in the mail, and I never get mail.
Yeah.
And I was taking the kids to the pool, and I just sat there, and I was like texting things that I would read and get so excited. But the awareness piece, like I have been walking around like this, and when I'm reading something, as you mentioned in the book, like I'll check my phone and I'm like, stop, you just need to be present.
I do that too.
With what's right here. My feet were crossed. Okay, uncross my feet.
Right.
So the awareness piece, but then also, which I want to get into about this idea, I feel like I'm going to sit on your lap. Speaking of movement.
It's okay.
The screenshot.
Saying, it kind of looks like we're in two different places. So the closer we get, it looks like we're actually together. We are actually together.
but the difference, the movement of breathing and loading the dishwasher and walking down the street, brushing my teeth. And I've been using things with clients this week and with my own kids. I mean, last night my daughter said, I don't have the words. And I was like, well, where do you feel it in your body? And I used to hate when therapists would say that to me. I was like, I don't know the words.
For me, like outside of my own therapist now, who is a dance therapist, I never had that asked. So I'm glad to hear that, like, that's becoming more of a thing, probably because of, we were talking like trauma in the body and Levine and Van der Kolk, like drawing more attention to where we hold things. But I'm actually glad to hear that, because I feel like I always got so, how are you? What are you, like, how does this feel? What I hear you saying is, like, it was always verbal.
Sure.
I'm sorry that you're sick of it, but I'm glad to hear that those questions are being asked.
But I think, and you bring up such a good point about the difference between exercise and meditation and movement.
Right.
And if you can tap into that a little bit, because I think as a society and a culture, we're so focused on, did you exercise today? How hard did you sweat? How long did you do it?
Right.
And that's like good behavior.
Right.
And I have gotten out of that language over years of training myself to rewire my brain, of thinking in ways of feeling the energy in my body. Right. Where do I feel certain, you're the expert, so I'll let you describe that.
That's the whole thing, right? Everybody's their own expert because it's your embodied experience. So, I think where I often start with regard to, one, most times we think of movement and the first thing that comes to mind is exercise. So it's just taking our mindset out of that and then asking ourselves, like, what other movements do I do? Like you just mentioned, taking stuff out of the dishwasher. I posted something earlier on Instagram and, it said reasons that exercise isn't movement, or how just using exercise as movement can be bad for your mental health. And it was funny how many times people were like, well, how else can I move? Sorry, what else is there, right? Like if I don't exercise, what are you talking about? And I just kept reiterating, like, breathing, blinking, gesturing, sitting, like these are movements that we're doing all the time. We just take them for granted. So I think outside of that, like once you understand that movement is more than just exercise, it's understanding too that a lot of exercise comes from a stress response. Not necessarily just trauma, it's not always trauma, but that our exercise can also perpetuate that stress cycle. So not that this is the only example, but I like to give this example where, if you're a runner, outside of strenuous exercise and cardiovascular activity, why do you run? What do you get from it? And sometimes people will be like, I feel calmer, I feel more connected, I feel more grounded, I've released something. But so many people don't feel that way. They just feel more hyped up. They're like, I feel like I'm running from something, and so the more you run, it's not solving anything. It's just perpetuating that need to run away. So that's why I like to, one, notice that, become aware of it, but then question or wonder, become curious about what would be the opposite of that response, right? And through movement, are there ways that we can start to invite in those other qualities so that I'm not always running? Is there something that I can I practice being more still, even if it's for 30 seconds? What does that bring up? And then, in therapy especially, you can talk about that.
Right. And people are so afraid to be still.
Right.
I mean, we are so, Erica and I were talking a little bit before we started, and the idea of the constant stimulation and information that we get on a daily basis, and this idea of multitasking and not being present. And when we can focus on just what's right in front of us, it heightens the experience, and it also brings up different feelings and emotions for us that we're not blocking with other devices.
Right, because I like to say that, we like to do instead of be, that the response is, the habit is always to keep doing something instead of just being or existing, because that comes with discomfort, it comes with anxiety. Our thoughts get really loud in the quiet. Worry and anxiety thrive in stillness. And if we're anxious people, which like I have a tendency to be anxious,
which blows my mind because your energy is not anxious. You are
I'm not anxious right now. So that's good.
No, but you do mention that in the book, that you are an overthinker, an overanalyzer, but in person,
which is like the irony of being a dance therapist, right?
You have always had this sense of calm to you. So I was relieved to read that, because it was relatable.
I mean, I think through just being body aware myself, it has changed my relationship to anxiety. I don't even know if I allude to this in the book anymore, but I'm very open about this identity of, like, I come from a line of warriors, and that was like a badge of honor, right? Like, that was my connection to my family. It was like, we're all warriors. All the women, we're all warriors, and it means we care, you know, and
gives you a sense of control in some ways.
Right, right. And so then I learned to rely on my anxiety, and then for most of my young life, if I didn't feel anxious, that was bad, right? It was like, again, control, you know? So, well, at least if I'm anticipating something and I'm anxious about it, then I know it's going to be okay, you know, because if I don't worry, anything could happen, you know, and then I can't prepare, I can't plan. So honestly, like going through dance therapy school, becoming a dance therapist, practicing, you know, as a therapist, but then also seeing my own therapist who's a dance therapist, it definitely changed my relationship to that. And it was like, why am I stuck in my head? Why can't I get out? And what's the most organic, now what feels like to be the fastest way out of that is to just draw my attention back to my body. And then it's like, is my body actually anxious? Most often not. It's the mind that's controlling the anxiety. Right. And if I can just like, and so that's where my energy comes from. You know, I'm more like, I can take up space and I'm not confined. And it's actually freedom from my mind, which is the one that's going, blah.
Which is just so fascinating because I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and you mentioned that, you know,
which I totally believe in. I mean, like,
absolutely, and it's not
right. No,
which one is better or not.
Well, I've gotten that where people are like, "Oh, so you hate talk therapy?" I'm like, "No, I am a talk therapist. Like, I need that license, otherwise I couldn't practice. I mean, in this state." But you know, I'm like, how do we support cognition? Maybe there's a step before that, you know, and if we can notice the movement, that actually helps support the cognition, which then helps change the behavior.
Sure, which is why I think everybody in our field needs to have this component and ability to tap into.
Totally, I agree.
Okay, good. So as people are listening to us talk, I'll make sure to check questions as we move along. But
this is like I'm like always like squinting. Like, where is it? I
don't know. What can people do at home on a daily basis that you can recommend for them, people who are curious, who are movement curious and want to start tapping into just acknowledging and being aware?
Well, since you mentioned, right, like we're always on our phones or doing something digital, if it's not easy enough or it doesn't feel accessible to remind yourself, I always say, like, start putting reminders on your digital things, like set an alarm, ask Alexa, you know, something like that. Put Post-its around the places that you frequent the most, especially like in your house or in your car, that actually say, how are you moving? What are you feeling in your body? Check in with your body, so that we can start to create that habit. So that it's not even about, where am I holding this? What emotion is this? It's just paying attention, just being more aware of how my body's showing up. Because maybe I'm not feeling that way yet, but if I do notice later on that there's a connection between my anxiety and my posture, or my anger and my posture, it's a slippery slope. So if I catch it as it's going there, then I circumvent, or I get there before the behavior shows up, you know? So I always talk about it being just from a tangible, like a physical standpoint. If I'm not aware of it, I get this like knot right between my shoulder blades. Actually, on a good day, it's on both sides. And if I'm not aware of it, I know it's there, because not even by the end of the day, but definitely by the end of the day, I get this pulling like down my neck, and there's like it's really tight here, my shoulders are pinched, and I get a tension headache. And then I get to the point where it's like, I have to take a Tylenol because it's just that tight that I need something to take the edge off, which I guess Tylenol is pretty benign, but that's what works for me. So I try to remind myself, right? Like, okay, what are my shoulders doing right now? How am I feeling in this moment? Is that tension already there? Because I want to try to avoid that really painful tension headache. Same thing happens with our emotions, right? Is this posture something that lends itself easily to, again, anxiety, fear, anger? Because if I notice the body first, I can actually get to it faster before all of a sudden I'm reacting and I've just kicked the dog or I've yelled at my husband, etc. So it's like I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Not previous step, it's the catalyst kind of for the cognition.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And then it's like, okay, now I can change the cognition and therefore I can change my behavior.
So it's almost like you're being proactive.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the mind-body connection.
Right,
It's not...
Which everybody has. So that's something, hopefully that's comforting, because people are like, how do I get that?
Yeah.
It's already
We all have
there.
it, right? It's just
really
tapping
already
into it.
there. That's why I was like, people spend so much money on these expensive programs and equipment, and I know you technically still need to buy the book, which you can get for 10% off.
Body aware. I'm matching.
I love it. But so outside of, a digital download or the audiobook or the actual book, like everything in the book comes from inside of you. So, after that, you don't need any equipment. You just need yourself.
But if you can, I mean, I'm so old school. I had my highlighter out,
me too.
notes in there, and it's a reference to be able to go back to and say, what can I do? How can I feel grounded? And I guess now that people can start bringing this awareness into their day-to-day and checking in with themselves more, I know you also treat people who haven't been aware for 20 or 30 years of their body.
Yeah.
And so they're coming to see you to bring awareness to, or to work through some things that they've been holding on to, or...
Yeah. I mean, quite honestly, I think a lot of people come not realizing that's what they need. Some do, right? Some are like, I really want to work on this mind-body connection. I've read about it, and I have trauma, and I really want to work through that. But, some individuals that come to me that don't even realize it's dance therapy, right? I'm on insurance panels, and so sometimes it's like, oh, I need a counselor, and you're in my area, and you take my insurance. It's mind-blowing, right, how quickly we get to these access points just because we're noticing how we move and we're shifting it. And then all of a sudden, either the floodgates open or, something comes out and it's like, oh my God, I haven't thought about that in 20 years. And, oh, that makes so much sense. Maybe that's where this is coming from. So, yes, some people consciously make the decision to come in and work on the mind-body connection.
Okay.
And others that are not aware of their mind-body connection or that they want to work on it just very quickly become oriented to it, rediscover it, of like, oh wow, that was really powerful.
And they're thinking they're coming to you to do talk therapy, and then you're like, and we're going to move around the room,
right? Or I'm just always asking, like, do you notice that, or can we just pause and can you just pay attention to your body in this moment? Like, you just said something really important. Where are you feeling that? Does it come up anywhere? Are you ignoring it? Is it numb? Because that's a huge catalyst for healing. And I don't know if you hear this a lot or read this on like different forums on Facebook, but I've heard so many therapists say like, oh, that was the easiest session. I didn't have to say anything. The person spoke the whole, or talked the whole time, or we just spent the whole session in silence and I didn't have to say a thing and that was easy. And I was like, oh my God, just because your words aren't saying anything, their body language must have been saying something. How did you feel? Like, when there's silence, I actually take the time to feel myself in the room. And I'm like, do I feel the need to say something? Usually, yes. And that's a signal to me to say, you know what, nothing needs to be said. Just let the client organically figure something out. Be in the silence and notice what comes up. Like, that's one thing dance therapists, I think, really thrive on, excel in, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, is something called kinesthetic empathy. you know, and it's like getting a sense for our clients just based off of what we're feeling in our body. And that's not something that is certainly something not taught in like a psychology, you know, program. We spend a lot of time talking about that and trying to experience it ourselves. And it can be very taxing for a therapist, you know, and so like kind of setting limits around that. But that's where I tap into that in the silence of like, what's going on? What am I feeling? And I don't know about you, but I remember, at least in my undergrad, you know, so much of psychology was like, don't make it about you. It's about the therapist. It's about the client, right? If they ask anything, just deflect it and put it back on them.
Yeah, sure.
Which I get, but for me, a lot of the information comes from my own body, comes from my experience in the session. So I'm not using, you know, I'm not saying, oh, well, I feel this and I noticed that. But I can offer that, you know, I can say, oh, I'm noticing that I'm really uncomfortable in this silence. How do you feel about that? You know, and they're like, yeah, me too, you know, or I don't know how I feel. Let me think about that.
Yeah.
So, you know, therapists get to use their body as a tool in therapy, and then ideally, you know, clients get to use it too.
You are going to change the landscape of therapy.
I mean,
but you know, I do.
Field. I guess that was, you know, we were talking about, you know, that it's weird for me to hear that because I want to be like, but it's not me, it's the field, because there's so many people that have paved the way.
Sure.
You know, and I write about them in my book.
Yeah.
But it's like I say it's like a best kept secret, you know. So as much as it feels good to hear that, I also want to be like, let's just bring dance therapy to the table, you know, and let's like start the dialogue around that. And if I get to be at the table, great. If I get to eat with everyone, that sounds good.
Yeah. Well, and what I love is you make this point that, I mean, you've worked with people who have disabilities. You've worked in assisted living situations with elderly clients, people who are not mobile. Hi. And so you teach them that you can move your body in so many different ways. You mentioned blinking.
Right.
Swallowing.
Like, how does blinking contribute to my mental health, you know? But just think about what happens when you're frozen, you know, what happens when you're in these fear stress responses, right? We kind of get like deer in headlights, you know, and you're not blinking. So again, just like reminding ourselves that we need to be moving in these involuntary ways, because when we're under stress or, you know, trauma responses kick in, that those necessary basic survival movements don't always happen, or they don't happen in a regulating way. They get hijacked. So that's why I'm like, blink, breathe.
Right. Well, and even in one of the vignettes, when you talk about a woman who came in with lower back pain, and being able to release some of that, and you know, these sayings, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Somebody's a pain in your neck. Listen to your gut.
Pain in somewhere else, right? Well, and I think as I was writing that part, and I think I allude to this in the book, but just like a little bit, it dawned on me how much of that language we're not using anymore. You know, can you text the weight of the world on my shoulders? I don't know. Is there an emoji for that? I don't know. I mean, probably. You know, so we're not even using language in the way that we did that suggested that the body had a seat at the table. And so it doesn't surprise me that we're not utilizing it in our lives anymore. You know, I don't know. I use that phrase all the time, like pain in my neck, pain in this, pain in that. But I'm not. Text is not my go-to language. So,
but those pains are real, you know, and where we carry tension and being able to feel that in our body, and something that I tap into a lot with my own family is when you quiet your mind in the chatter, what does your gut say?
Yeah.
And so that is something that I'm wondering if we can pause for a minute, because something that I used with my daughter last night, who's having a total meltdown, 10-year-old, didn't have the words to express what was going on.
Yeah.
Hugged herself.
Oh.
Because I had been talking about, from reading your book, like how calming and soothing that can be.
Yeah.
That this can feel very vulnerable.
Right.
but this can feel very soothing. So can we try that with people at home? Just can you lead us through
absolutely.
that piece of regulating?
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, I'm going to offer the. Not going to remember what chapter it's in, but I'm going to offer the grounding practice that's actually an adaptation of Dr. Amber Elizabeth Gray's work. So she is a dance therapist that specifically is doing polyvagal theory with dance movement therapy. So she works very closely with Stephen Porges. And so the first thing that she offers is actually ritual. And I always like to kind of redefine ritual, because it's not just like praying to a deity or a higher power. It's not prayer specifically. It's not, it's not even a meditation or a yoga practice. It can be, but Dr. Gray talks about her morning coffee, and that is a ritual because it's something that anchors you.
Yes.
It's something that anchors you into the moment. So you want to do it intentionally, you want to do it mindfully, but find a ritual. And then the next thing that she talks about is, she calls it the oxytocin hug. And so we can try that together. So you just wrap your arms around yourself and just take a moment to feel your body, right? Feel your hands on your body. Yeah, I just heard a breath. So sometimes this allows us to just breathe into, you might even feel your breath in your back, which is a beautiful way to expand your breathing, expand your awareness instead of constantly breathing from our shoulders. But feel the breath across your back. You may feel your abdomen start to rise and fall. And it is very regulating for several reasons, but one thing too is that you're crossing the midline of your body. And so when you cross the midline of your body, you're actually increasing the neural activity across the corpus callosum. And it's very focusing, it's very grounding, and allows you to be a little bit more present in the moment. So you might feel your heartbeats or your heart rate start to drop. And it's, ideally, I realize everybody's situation's a little different, but it can be very soothing because this is how we were soothed as infants, right? You were wrapped. This is why weighted blankets feel good, right? So you can kind of be your own weighted blanket, and give yourself that oxytocin, even through a self-hug. And then lastly, she calls it regulation breath. And so it's really just about placing your hand against your sternum, and that if you just apply a little bit of pressure, it's enough to either bring you down, kind of calm you down, or if you're feeling a little lethargic, it's enough to actually bring up your energy. It's so simple.
So why do we make it so difficult?
Well, because we've been conditioned to think that exercise is what we need to do to move, and I have to lift weights and I have to get a good sweat, and that's true in some ways for cardiovascular activity, but I'm talking about mental health.
Right.
And actually some of that totally negates and minimizes and just circumvents the basic needs of moving our body for mental health.
Okay, and breath, right? What do people, therapists, school teachers, parents, doctors, when somebody is feeling anxious, they'll say, just breathe.
Right, sure, okay. Yeah, I got that all the time, just calm down. Oh, okay, thanks, I didn't think about that. Don't you think I thought that?
But you talk about being at the doctor's office.
Right, because I had terrible white coat syndrome,
which is where your blood pressure elevates because you're nervous.
Right.
And so, and I'm sure people can relate.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, so I actually kind of came to understand that this is, of course, after I wrote the book. So I'm I should have put this in there. But I think I've come to realize more and more that for me, being a kid, being in my body, I associated with illness. Not that I was ill as a kid, but I was only aware of my body when I was sick, or it was let's put a cold compress on, or you need something to bring that fever down, or feeling my stomach, and being nervous about that or what's going to happen with that. it didn't feel like a safe place to be. So if I wasn't aware of my body, then everything was okay because, it's not sick. I'm all right. So it's so interesting to me because, the like, just calm down. Just breathe. It kind of got conditioned in me, that if I'm going to the doctor, right, what if something's wrong? Not just going for a checkup, but they're going to find something. And that was very anxiety provoking for me. So any doctor, dentist, eye doctor, like it didn't matter. It was like hearing the word doctor, my blood pressure elevated. And then it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You'd get to the doctor and they'd be like, your blood pressure's really high. Should we talk about some medication? And I was like, oh my God, that's my worst fear being, not that it's the worst fear, but like it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I talk about in the book how I kind of took matters into my own hand and like did some body aware practices while I was at the doctor. And
that didn't include breathing.
No, I mean, it helped regulate my breathing, but I actually had to meet my body where it was. I had to be in the jumpiness, be in the anxiety, be in the like, until it organically like slowed down. And then the nurse came in and she was like, I'm going to take your blood pressure. And I was like, okay. And my heart rate was still up, but my blood pressure was down because I wasn't anxious. And I remember her not saying anything, putting the cuff away. And she was like, okay, the doctor will be in a moment. And I was like, was it high? And she was like, your blood pressure? She was like, oh, no, it's actually normal. Yeah, fine. I was like, are you sure? Do you want to take it again? That's not to say that I'm entirely cured, but I was like, there's something to this. Like, this really works. Like meeting my body where it is instead of where I want it to be. And that's what's happening when we say, calm down, just breathe. It's the, well, I want you to be calm, but I have to meet you in what you're not. And that's not calm. So meet in the freak out, meet in the like, and just like match that tone, match that rhythm for your body, because that is the way in to actually where you want to go.
And then how can you use it for good? So you do talk a little bit about, the power pose. If you're fearful of public speaking or there's something performance related and you're trying to hype yourself up, or you're feeling fabulous and you want to embrace being outside and spin around. Like, can you talk about how we can tap into that when we're feeling actually really good?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the same. It's like meeting your body where it is, so that it's not always that we have to use movement to change. We can also use movement to just bring more of what we're feeling in. So notice, same thing. Just like you can ask yourself, how do I know I'm feeling anxious? Like, how do you know you're feeling joyful? How do you know that you're feeling excited? How do you know that you're happy, calm, present? And when you notice that, you always have it at your disposal. You can do more of that, So I talked about this too, like the dance like no one's watching. It's like, that's a great phrase, but are we really doing that? And does it matter if anybody's watching? Because if something feels good for you and you're not hurting yourself and you're not hurting anyone else, then do it. Just do it. Like, do more of
everybody
it.
has permission.
Right. Just do more of that movement. Yeah. But we've talked ourselves out of it because it's like, well, this isn't serving a purpose. I'm not burning any calories, so why would I do it? I'm not strengthening my muscles. But you're strengthening your emotional muscles. And I think we've gotten so far from that. I mean, clearly, there's such a mental health crisis and a lack of empathy in the world, which is for another conversation, right?
I think it ties in. I mean, Erica wrote this book during the pandemic, and I know that it was a seed that was planted for a long time, and that you were in the throes of writing, but I think you really produced this book during the pandemic and had a baby, and for me, I had a hard time getting off the couch some days, and so I hear a lot.
I'm still in that sometimes. No joke. I'm like, I actually got dressed. I'm wearing pants. You can't see them, but I'm actually wearing pants.
But how did you find that in such a traumatic time for so many of us that I think that was probably very beneficial, because writing a book can be extremely cathartic.
It was. So ironically, it is actually what kept me connected to my work. And I always talk, at least to my family and friends, but I'm very open about the fact that like work for me is self-care, to a degree. I could easily throw myself into work and then it's, negative and we burn out.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing it in an intentional, grounded way with clear, healthy boundaries, which again doesn't always happen, it is an extension of myself. It is like the work that I do, it feeds my soul. Like I think that's why that energy you talk about like comes out, because it's kind of it's not just physical, it's not just mental, like it's just part of me. It's like this, like, I don't know, it feels kind of existential, but it's like that spiritual part of me. So because we were locked down, I had a lot of clients that were just fearful in general, and it was like, I don't have a time to think. I don't really know how to breathe in this. So therapy goes out the window. When of course it's like we need it more.
The most, yeah.
So a lot of my clients kind of stopped therapy temporarily. We didn't know, can we do this telehealth, and do I have coverage in telehealth? Because my clients at the time were mostly insurance based. It is really what kept me connected to my work. And talking about it, writing about dance therapy, like kept that spark going, because the only other outlet I felt like I had for that was being in session, and sessions weren't happening as much as I wanted them to be. Sure. So it was an interesting like flip, because when I stopped writing, it was kind of like, you've done the edits, it's going to print. I mean, there was like a real void for a while. I was seeing clients, but again, things were very light. And, again, I think because of the uncertainty and the landscape of COVID, it was like, how else am I going to connect to this work, and then like reaching out to people, or I think ironically I got very involved in social media, because I was like, I just need to stay connected. Yeah. So that's really what that book was. It was cathartic in that way, not because it was like, oh, I'm letting go of all this stuff. Oh, I'm talking about my life. It was like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want people to know. And so that is literally what kept me connected to my work when everything was shut down.
And you had a mission. I mean, your mission is to spread
clear
awareness about this and to help people get more connected in their body.
Yeah. Because I'll be honest, a lot of people out there, to be like totally blunt, a lot of professionals out there, experts out there who are doing somatic work were taught by dance therapists. Okay. But they don't talk about it. They don't give credit where credit is due. We're very good at not giving actual credit where credit is due. I say we, but a lot of Western practice, right, is like we kind of hear of something, kind of take it as our own, or we rework it, and then we're like, this is amazing. I talk about how like we create the problem and then we provide the remedy, right? Let me just tie it up in a bow, and there you go. And hearing behind the scenes how many of my colleagues like were directly impacted, like those were my words, and I didn't get credit for those. I don't know that I'm going to change that entirely with this book, but it's a huge disservice, And so it's like, well, it's not their responsibility to talk about our field. It's ours. And it just felt like I'm going to do everything I can to put it out there. And I've done it in a lot of different arenas, but I was like, well, let's try a book and see what happens. And it was like a crazy journey, as you know. But it's making waves. It's changing the narrative. So
and it's another resource, and I think that's what I appreciate too. Is you do talk about colleagues in the field and do reference them and give resources for people who want to dive deeper. But it is such. I mean, it's an easy read in the sense that like I was eager to learn more and I could comprehend it. That it was very simplistic in the reader being able to understand.
That's like been the overwhelming feedback. Okay. And I meant to do that, but that doesn't mean it's going to be received that way. But like I kept using this word accessible, like accessible and digestible, accessible and digestible. And I thought, like, this is what I would, obviously it's my voice, but like, this is what I would want to read. This is how I speak to my clients. And it's not infantilizing. It's not, let me really dilute it for you. It's just for people that don't speak body. Yeah. Right. Which I was included in that and sometimes still am. How do I translate that? How do I get it so like, oh, I can do this. Sure. I can be in my body. I can, use my body as a mental health resource. So to hear that from people in the field, outside of the field, you know, acquainted with their body, not acquainted with their body, has been like so validating. 'Cause I'm like, oh, that voice came through. I'm so glad, because I'm not reinventing the wheel. Like a lot of this work has been done. It was, how can we get it out in a way that people can read it, they can access it, and they can practice it. So I was kind of joking, like doing little reels and stuff, that like having problems processing this text, get this one. like it's like the companion that all of these, you know, somatic practices need. So I'm so happy to hear that from a fellow clinician.
Yes.
So.
And you know, I am a huge meditation guru. Like, I love to meditate. It's what saved me through the pandemic. And I am an overthinker and overanalyzer as well. So that is something that, like, I can totally check out.
It's necessary to be a psychotherapist.
I think is that why everyone's like, are you psychoanalyzing me? Like, no, I'm just in my head.
I feel like that's like a prerequisite. I don't know, maybe not, but I'm like, aren't we all overthinkers?
Yeah, which makes us, you know, practice what we preach, right? So a lot of this is using the tools in our own life. But you do make a differentiation between meditation and movement, because I know you're not moving during meditation.
Right.
I mean, you are, because you're breathing.
Right.
And if you're doing progressive relaxation, you're tightening and releasing.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, never using the words like meditation expert. You know, I'm familiar with guided meditations or like movement meditations. And so I think, like, especially when I was going through school, getting this new idea of what meditation was, you know, because I still had that image of, you know, sitting on a mat with my eyes closed, like kind of, you know, Gandhi-esque, you know, or
no
that's
thoughts.
Not right. You know, being in the moment, clean slate. Like, those were myths. That was misconception. You know, that was like maybe a westernized version of meditation. That's not really how the monks practiced meditation. It was like following the thoughts, you know, and bringing yourself back to the present moment. So learning to meditate mindfully and bodyfully, right? Like, a body scan to me is a meditation. It's just another way of meditating. I had a client that I remember would meditate on the L.
Oh yeah.
Which, like, most people would be like, well, you can't do that, it's noisy and it's this and it's that, because it's the practice, it's not the environment. You know, it's like, actually, it's one of the great ways to practice meditation, because how many distractions are there, right? And you're like, oh man, that just took me out of the present. Okay, come back to the body. So, you know, I'd never set myself up or say like, oh, I'm a meditation expert, or I don't teach meditation. I don't even know that I use that word in sessions with my clients very often, except if we're like, well, would you like a guided meditation? It's a script, right? Do you need help being present to your body and mind in the moment? I can provide that, right? Or I can teach you how to do it. I'm hopeful that, like, so it's not out yet, but when Bodyware, the audiobook, comes out next week, I'm kind of hopeful that that will serve for some people as guided meditation, because there's so many exercises in there. And so, yeah, for me, it was like challenging meditation as stillness, and that, again, it's the practice of coming back into the moment. And we can do that through the body. And so you can move through your meditation, or just notice the movement that's already happening. You know, it's like the breathing, the heartbeat, just to come back to the moment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I just felt myself get so much calmer listening to you.
Right.
Like, yeah. Okay. I want to make sure we get to some of the questions here. I have one.
I think Sean had a question.
Have you noticed any different results utilizing these methods in men?
Well, I don't know about, the word different really pops out at me, like different results. I don't think I've noticed different results. I think I've noticed similar results, and that is what almost makes it different, right? Because we automatically, at least I know in our field, we automatically kind of assume that it's going to be women. When I have prospective clients, or someone says, this was been years, but I remember, it was like, my daughter loves to dance, so I think dance therapy would be really great for her. What does she have to wear? So I'm like, please don't show up in a tutu. Unless that's her thing, and she wants to be a pretty little princess or a ballerina, great. But I was like, you just come as you are, just wear what you feel comfortable in. At this point, at least with regard to my older adult clients with some form of dementia, more of them have been men, which I think has reworked that stigma, where it's like, oh, it's only for women. Because this is a theory, I guess, although I'm sure this has been proven in some regards. Men have been conditioned to not feel emotion and not talk about emotion and not show emotion. But when you are in your body, you have no choice but to do that.
Yes.
So honestly, some of the most amazing sessions I've had have been with my men clients or participants in groups, because they're not all personal clients. Sometimes I'm contracted to go into a facility. And it's the men that oftentimes have the most beautiful, kind of groundbreaking, not that has to happen, but these moments of clarity, and humor, so much humor, even in their dementia, and so I don't know if it's different results. I think it's very similar results, but just realizing that this works for everybody, men, children. It's been a while since I've worked with very little kids, but I always like to say my youngest client was 3 and my oldest client was 107, and they've been men and women. And
107?
Yeah, that was my oldest client in a nursing home.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about just noticing the movement that's present, know, because I don't really anticipate a ton of movement from a 107-year-old. But it was also just understanding her body language, and noticing when she felt comfortable. Not to derail the question, but one of the behaviors that they would always mention was she isolated. She wouldn't come out of her room. But that came down to how she felt in the presence of people who she didn't think were her class.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So she wouldn't sit at a table with people who she didn't feel belonged in the same class that she did. This was, different, coming up in a different age, right? She was born, this was a while ago, I think she was born in the late 1800s.
Oh my gosh.
No, that would that would have been about, because I was an intern, so yeah, I think that would have been 1900, 1901.
Okay.
So anyway, math is not my strong suit. But,
mine either.
Right? And this isn't I was just working with her. This was a while ago now. But it was just amazing to use movement to see how she either showed up or, she'd come into a room, she would kind of look around and then immediately go back. And just noticing those shifts of she didn't feel comfortable, right? Or felt maybe the room or the people were, not of the same stature. And so she didn't want to engage in that. It wasn't that she was combative. She wasn't isolating. She was,
she didn't feel comfortable.
She didn't feel comfortable.
And you talk about that too when you're in a situation, in a social situation, and you noticed yourself with your shoulders, maybe you shrink, right? Not just you, but I think we can all identify with that. And being able to, or have permission in a safe space to take up space.
Yeah. And that taking up space, I think it's been seen in so many ways as, I kind of want to be a burden. I don't want to, take over the room. If you've been conditioned, from when you were young, to be seen and not heard. It's just all these ways that keep us small. And so we don't want to go into the deep end and then all of a sudden be walking into all of, go from the shrinking place to
taking over the room.
Right. And, your chin up and I'm, this puffed out presence. But there's so much in between that.
Yeah, there is.
And just starting with the micro movements, of kind of oh, okay, I'm a little, all right, so can I just, lift my chin, or can I make eye contact, or okay, maybe now I can lift up or sit up. So, it's just
little movements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I have people, people are like, what's the, if nothing else, like what is the one takeaway that you want people to know, and so I've been joking because I'm like, you don't even have to open the book. You don't. Like, if you buy it and you never open it, I hope you read it, but if you buy it and you never do anything with it, just let it sit on your shelf and then look at it and just notice the title and just do what it says.
Or read it in every movement you make for 2 weeks.
Of course I want you to read it. It's funny. It might have been with Dr. Nicole, actually, when that came up. And she was like, what's the takeaway? Or like, what's something you want everybody to know? And where is it? I was like, it's on the cover. It's right there. And it's pretty, so it's fun to look at.
Well, we're getting close. I want to see, is there Kim, how important are you finding movement in helping with battling depression and anxiety?
Oh, yeah.
I have one additional question. What is your view on trauma memories being stored in our bodies and the importance of releasing them?
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for asking those questions. Okay, so the first one, how important is finding movement and helping battling? So it's extremely important because, depression and anxiety, it's not just a mindset, but we know how that contributes to what we think, right? And whether you believe that it's, and I know that there's new research coming out saying that it's not just chemicals in the brain, or it is. It's like the age-old, like, broccoli's good for you, broccoli's bad for you. This is good for you, this is bad. So it's like, take it with a grain of salt. But it takes you out of those ingrained habits. So chances are you've been thinking a certain way for so long, right? You're moving in a way that perpetuates or keeps you in those patterns, right? Yes. And so it's not just like, oh, look, I'm moving differently and I'm not depressed anymore. Sometimes that happens, but again, if it's still a chemical imbalance, then you're going to need support with that as well, nutritional or medicinal, what have you. But it absolutely works because for some people, it's the first time that they're actually moving in a different way that doesn't perpetuate their anxiety and their depression. That can provoke more anxiety, right? Because you're like, this is unfamiliar and I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with that. So we just, deal with that as it comes up. But there's lots of research that shows like shift in posture changes with, negative mindset. And, it's no surprise that like as we're engaging in our phones more, like our posture is more stooped and we're looking down more, like that contributes to maybe not full on depression, but depressive feelings, right? Feeling sad or depressed at times. So yes, it definitely helps. And again, it's because we're changing the way we move, which changes the way we think.
Yes.
Again, not to always bring it to social media, but I really value a lot of different thought leaders. And I read Mel Robbins' most recent book, the High Five Habit. Yeah. But before that, her book was the
5-second rule.
5-second rule, right? So it's, you pause, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what really caught me about that is I was like, she was changing her movement. Like, we're not just changing our thoughts, right? Because she even says, pause, stop what you're going to do, feed into the hesitation, count backwards, right? The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then decide how you want to move. Literally, she says, and then move. And I was like, oh, it's body aware. So it's definitely possible. It's just like looking at like, oh, I can change my movement. It's not just, it's not just how I gesture, it's not the exercise that I do. Like I talk about movement signature, it's like how someone knows that it's you from a mile away.
Yes.
Like, oh, right, there's Kelley. Yeah. Based off like how, that's how she stands, right? And that's how she sits. And it kind of ties into the trauma memories, right? So there's like one section, it's like a paragraph or two, because I say, I'm not, I don't consider myself a trauma expert. I do see a lot of people with trauma because there's such a, it's such a hot topic now, right? Yeah. Trauma in the body. But the thing that I really like to talk about that is very inherent to movement analysis, dance therapy, is this idea that not only are memories stored in the body, right? And then trauma obviously impacts that. but that when we are triggered, right, when we're re-experiencing that trauma, we're brought back to earlier developmental movement patterns. And it's those earlier developmental movement patterns that often contribute or exacerbate the early thought patterns, right? So as an example, you may be in the presence of someone who's a mature adult, in their 40s or 50s. Well, I assume mature. Picture someone that you chronologically mature. And then all of a sudden, something shifts and they have kind of an adolescent regression, if you will, right? Or they have a little bit of a temper tantrum. And I've had clients say, well, it's my mom, but I feel like the parent. Why do I feel like the parent? And that's often when I say, I don't want to assume anything, but, is there a history with, trauma, or is there any type of emotional abuse that's happened? And more often than not, the answer is, yeah, actually, but, she won't do anything about it. Or oh, my mom doesn't believe in therapy. It's oh, okay. So notice when that person is triggered, is that when you feel like you're the parent? Have you become the one that's older, right? And again, it's because we shift how we're moving in our body, and we might not even realize it. It's just that when I talk about developmental movement patterns, it's these movements that we do before we're 1.5, 2 years old. So it's a lot of these things that contribute to us being able to walk. It's the tummy time, it's the how we come into our environment, how we reach out for our pacifier. It's not just the developmental milestones, right? It's not sitting up, walking, talking. Those are great. It's movement patterns that actually support those milestones. And so when trauma is in the picture, those come back into play. So all of a sudden, I'm really thrust into this early developmental pattern of, something of, we'll say lack of awareness, right? Or I'm really focused on myself, but I'm not really able to be present or engage in the people around me. It's a very young pattern.
Yeah.
So that's definitely present through trauma. And again, a narrative that I felt was kind of missing from the mainstream conversations about trauma. So hopefully that makes sense.
Well, and just something that I would add is I think trauma survivors can have such a disconnect with mind and body.
Yes.
Especially if it was physical trauma.
Yes.
So as a protective mechanism, kind of.
And when the trauma happened, right? So, I mean, so many of us, there's collective trauma happening in our adult world, right? But depending on when, if you identify as having trauma, depending on when the trauma occurred, when you are triggered by that trauma, you will revert back to that age. So that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to walk, right? It's not oh, I'm, all of a sudden I'm crawling on the floor. But it's those developmental patterns that kind of go offline. So the issue is that when that's not present, then the cognition isn't present either. So this isn't a trauma specifically, but I talk about with my older adults, when cognition is diminished, or if in dementia, I was noticing that these developmental patterns were regressing. And then it was oh, well, no wonder that they can't have, higher cognition, or they're losing the ability to do this. It was mirrored in their movements. And that actually by engaging them in certain movements, some of that cognition was restored. Even if only in the moment, someone that was nonverbal was actually able to say something.
Oh my gosh.
So I was there's something there. I don't have a lab to do that that study, but maybe someone will. I wanted to do that as my thesis. Right, when I sit at that table. I actually wanted to do that as my thesis, and it was it wasn't supported. We're that sounds really expensive, and we don't have the equipment for that. So I wrote about it instead.
Well, we just have another minute or so. Did you want to close this out with an embodied experience?
Sure. I just want to make sure that, okay, didn't know if that was an additional question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, how about this? I've never used Crowdcast, so I don't know if there's chat, because Kim asked a question. So for anybody that is present, because I know some of us are probably multitasking, I'm just wondering if you can answer the question of how are you moving right now? And just end us with some words in the chat so that we can leave with an idea or choices. We can get, more vocabulary in the moment, and then I'll just bring us through a little movement, bring us through the dimensions so we can leave feeling a little bit more centered. But I'll do that as people are hopefully typing in the comments.
And I wanted to close with this quote: give your body real estate and invest in it. That is such a great mantra. That's my takeaway. That's next to body aware. That's my mantra next to it.
Yeah.
That we're investing.
Okay, so let's do that actually. So I'm going to invite you guys to, if you can put your feet on the floor. If you're in a chair, at least have something against your feet, right? So if you're in a wheelchair or your feet are elevated, so that there's something providing feedback. And we're going to take real estate in our body by just reaching into the space above us. So that can just be lifting your body, it can just be, putting your shoulders back, but it can also be a nice reach into the space above you. Right, so this is real estate, right? Taking up more space. And the property rates are really good right now, so take up lots of space. Good. You can do the same thing. Our environment is a little non-conducive, but you can reach down, if you can touch your knees, or if you can touch your toes. Right. Yeah, so again, this is hopefully very accessible, right? I'm not inviting you to do something that you can't do. I'm inviting you to do what is possible. And then when you're ready to sit up, we'll bring back that oxytocin hug. So just, give yourself an embrace. Good, and if it feels possible, I'm going to invite you to expand or reach out. Again, have to maneuver here. There we go. Right, and don't force it. Notice what is possible for you in the moment. And so if you can only kind of come halfway, or if you want to stay in this hug, that's perfectly fine. But this is one way to just start taking up real estate, start taking up more space, and then just notice, I'm breathing differently just from that stretch. So, yeah.
I feel like I just took a graduate class.
Right?
I mean, we're in the same field, but we specialize in such different things.
Right.
That this was invaluable for me, and I know that it was invaluable for everybody who was able to be here tonight.
Yeah,
so
thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks to Barbara's books, and like I said, if you haven't already gotten the book, I know that you can purchase it. Just use the code EVENT and you'll get 10% off of your purchase. So thank you guys for being here, and thank you for being here.
Of course.
This conversation alone made my night. So, I'm glad you guys are here, but let's be honest, if you weren't, still living awesome. So it's so nice to get to talk to you. And I look forward to seeing all the things that you have continue to do for our field too. So thanks.
Yeah, maybe we can do a workshop together sometime.
We'll put that graduate course together. Why not, right?
I love it. Have a great night, you guys.
All right, good night, everybody.